It's good to be here. Andrews University is my intellectual home. I have, in one way or another, been connected with Andrews University for almost 55 years. And I've worked to a greater or lesser extent with all 6 of its presidents and the last 2 presidents of Emmanuel Missionary College. In fact, I helped the first 2 presidents to write their memoirs during the same term, which was rather difficult because they didn't like each other and could not be on campus at the same time. Anyway, I want you to know I began my career here as a specialist in cleaning toilets. That's true. And it was piecework, and I did fantastically well. Nobody could figure out in the business office how I could earn so much money. So I once calculated on how many thousands of toilets and urinals and wash basins I had cleaned at Andrews University, but that bit of data has slipped my aging mind. 2 years of that, and then 9 years later I came back as a philosopher that taught philosophy of Adventist education, among other things, and then my last 21 years as a professor of church history. And since about 13 years ago, I have been pretending I'm retired. The only real difference was my workday since retirement has started at 4 in the morning instead of 6, and I got paid half as much. Other than that, it's been a great retirement. Okay, for my paper. I have had to make a choice, if I'm going to use a preaching style or a paper, but I've got a constructed argument that I want to share with you. More and more thinking people in my community have stopped sending their children to Seventh-day Adventist colleges. And I don't blame them, said the voice on the other end of the line. Even though we sponsored our 4 children to Adventist institutions, I'm not sure that I would do it again. That telephone call would have been bad enough. It had come from a disinterested crank. But the statements were expressed by a professional who was deeply committed to Adventism and quite active at both the local, national, and international levels of the church. A person whose finger is on the pulse of one of the largest Adventist institutional centers in North America. As educational costs continue at both the private and public colleges, more and more Adventist parents are asking pointed questions. Does the cost differential result in better value? Can Adventist schools win the quality of education war against the heavily endowed Harvards and Stanfords or the leading state institutions? If the goal of Adventist education is to out-Harvard Harvard, it is doomed to failure. In fact, in most cases, Adventist education can't even out-podunk local podunk state U when it comes to facilities and finance. And even if Adventist institutions could out-Harvard Harvard and out-podunks of the land, we would have to ask if it is worth the effort. I think not. Mere survival in the competitive marketplace is insufficient ground for sacrifice by either the sponsoring denomination or the teachers who work at less than market salaries. The survival of Adventist universities and college will not be worth the effort if these schools fail to produce a unique product. Their product must fill a gap that other institutions do not and cannot fill. In order to achieve these goals, planners must define both what is crucial and unique about Seventh-day Adventist higher education. That point is highlighted in the 2009 report of the Association of Adventist Colleges and Universities Planning Committee. Number one, in a rank ordering of 24 items related to the needs of Adventist higher education, if the institutions in the North American divisions are to work together as more of a system, number one was the refinement and articulation of Adventist uniqueness. Why do we exist? Why does this campus exist? That uniqueness, of course, is closely related to the uniqueness in its educational goals and purposes. Shane Anderson, in his perceptive book, How to Kill Adventist Education, he was one of my students, circles around the same concern. Anderson notes, and I quote, Adventist parents increasingly aren't willing to pay the price to send their kids to institutions that lack a sufficiently Adventist flavor. After all, why pay thousands of dollars to send your child to a school that is no longer substantially different than the average Christian school or the local public school down the street? Compounding the problem, Anderson points out, is the declining literacy among Adventist laity and clergy and educators as to the meaning and mission of Adventism in an evangelical context. He writes that we currently have large numbers of baptized Seventh-day Adventists, paid clergy and laity, who, while they think much of Christ and his grace, don't have much regard for Adventist claims to have a unique mission in the world. Furthermore, Adventism has spent much of the past 2 decades attempting to move itself into mainstream Western culture, and in so doing, Adventism's reason for being has been, in my opinion, clouded, and thus unavoidably its educational system has been obscured as well. That's Anderson. Later in the book, Anderson notes, does Adventism really have a unique role to play in the world? His reply is that many are no longer sure. Finally, he notes, when we are murky or uninterested in the uniqueness of Adventism, we are far less inclined to send our kids to Adventist schools. Here, he could have added that if the denomination's educators and administrators are murky on the uniqueness and role of Adventism in a world moving toward the eschaton, there will be no sufficient impetus to make the churches, colleges, and universities truly unique and thus needed institutions in an ever-growing sea of alternatives. This paper will discuss 6 essential student takeaways if Adventist higher education is to reach its goals and perhaps even survive. The last 5 years, combined enrollment in North America has decreased 2% a year. And this is a trend that is probably not going to change. We have got to make an argument for ourselves. And that argument is what we do in our classrooms and in relationship to our students. The first essential takeaway is the development of young people intellectually, socially, and professionally. Ellen White, for one, was clear on those goals. As a result, she wrote in 1891 that it is right that you should feel that you must climb to the highest round of the educational ladder, philosophy, and history are important studies. And in the face of misunderstandings of her counsel on speedy preparation, Ellen White penned that no movement should be made to lower the standard of education in our school at Battle Creek. Read that, Berrien Springs, same school. The students should tax the mental powers. Every faculty should reach the highest possible development. She had no doubt of the importance of the highest, and this is a quote, the highest culture of the mind, and the fact that ignorance was not a Christian virtue. Similar statements can be found in Ellen White's writings on the necessity of preparing students for the world of work. And she didn't merely mean work with a person's hands as they prepared for careers in agriculture and the trades. To the contrary, she urged the upgrading of Adventist education to prepare individuals for the professions. Thus, she recommended that the education to be given at the fledgling institution at Loma Linda should be of the highest order, and that the youth studying there were to be given a medical education that will enable them to pass the examinations required by law. That meant that Adventist colleges and secondary schools must also aim at preparing students to meet the legal standards. And what she noted about the medical field extends to the other professions. Some years ago, down in Orlando, I presented a paper on academic freedom, and I can't remember what the title was, but it was the quality of Adventist education. There was a huge struggle in the 19th century on whether we should become Bible colleges that just focused on Bible, or should we become liberal institutions that had a well-balanced education? I'm going to tell you right now, if it wasn't for Ellen White, we wouldn't be where we are today. We would be Bible colleges, and we would have never developed the tools in which to criticize her. So we need to remember these kinds of things when we look at the lady. Okay? It's interesting that Adventists can fight about female in this one. Our foremost clergy person happened to be a female. I've never been able to figure you Adventists out. I'm a convert, by the way. I look on the outside. I used to have a sermon called Why I Don't Like Adventists, but it sounded a little negative, so I stopped preaching it. I like Adventists that happen to be Christians, but if they're only Adventists, let me loose. Okay? I got to watch out. I could take 3 hours here. Okay. The temptation is always right below the surface for me to start preaching. And if I do, I'll never finish what I came to do. Okay, there's not the slightest doubt that Ellen White held that Adventist schools should prepare young people to succeed in this earthly life by developing them mentally, socially, physically, and vocationally. Those ideas of education are an essential part of the identity of education at Andrews University. But if we only accomplish those goals, there is really no need for Adventist schools. After all, those are the aims of the public universities, and they often do an excellent job of preparing people academically, socially, physically, and vocationally. If those are the only goals we achieve, or even aim at as Seventh-day Adventist educators, we might as well save our money and put it to a better use. That conclusion brings me to the second essential Adventist educational takeaway: a preparation for the life to come. The book Education, in its first chapter, sets forth what is in many ways the heart of an Adventist philosophy of education. In the first paragraph, we read that our ideas of education take too narrow and too low a range. Such is true, and we as Adventist educators aim only at or primarily at the tasks that form the goals of secular or public education. There is, we read on, need of a broader scope, a higher aim. True education means more than the pursuit of a certain course of study. It means more than a preparation for the life that now is. It has to do with the whole being and with the whole period of existence possible to man. It is the harmonious development of the physical, the mental, and the spiritual powers. It prepares the student for the joy of service in this world and for the higher joy of service, of wider service in the world to come. There are several key words in that paragraph. The first centers on true education. True education is that education that transcends the goals of secular education. True education is that education which has a higher aim than merely preparing people to be good and productive students of California, Kenya, British Columbia, Brazil, or Michigan. The second key word is whole, a word she uses with two dimensions. The first, Adventist education must emphasize the whole or entire period of human existence. Thus, it is not merely focused on helping students learn how to earn a living or on becoming highly cultured by the standards of the present world. Those aims may be worthy and important, but they're not sufficient. The realm of eternity and preparation for it must also come under the purview of any Adventist education worthy of church support. On the other hand, some pious but misdirected individuals might be tempted to make heaven the focus of education while neglecting the present realm and preparation for the world of work and participation in human society. Ellen White asserted that neither extreme is correct. Rather, preparation for both the earthly and the eternal worlds must be included in Adventist education and placed in proper relationship to each other. The book, Fundamentals of Christian Education, catches that balance when it highlights the fact that while students should aim at the, and this is a quote, highest round of the educational ladder intellectually, unless the knowledge of science is a stepping stone to the attainment of the highest purpose, it is worthless. The education that does not furnish knowledge as enduring as eternity is of no purpose. The second aspect of wholeness in the book Education's opening paragraph is the imperative to develop the entire person. Secular education of necessity leaves out the spiritual aspect, but Adventist education must aim at developing all facets of human beings, including the spiritual, as well as the intellectual, the physical, the social, and the vocational. In short, the goal of education is to develop the whole person for the whole period of existence open to them in this world and the world to come. In that sense, it transcends the possibilities of secular education as well as many forms of Christian education and, unfortunately, even some so-called Adventist education. One other key word in education's opening paragraph is service. The joy of service in this world and the higher joy of wider service in the world to come. Interestingly enough, it should be noted that the centrality of service is also featured both on the first page of the book and on its last, where we read, "In our life here, earthly sin-restricted though it is, the greatest joy and the highest education are in service." That emphasis on service should come as no surprise to anyone who reads the words of Jesus. He was a service-oriented person. If the first page of the book Education makes room for Adventist education in the pedagogical world by adding in the spiritual and preparing for the whole period of human existence, it is on the book's second page that begins to move beyond generalities and to focus on what she meant by these ideas. Specifically, Ellen White points out that if educators really want to understand the primary purpose of education, they need to understand 4 things. As she puts it, in order to understand what is comprehended in the work of education, we need to consider 1, the nature of man, and 2, the purpose of God in creating him. We need to consider also 3, the change in man's condition through the coming in of a knowledge of evil, and 4, God's plan for still fulfilling his glorious purpose in the education of the human race. She fleshes out the core of her philosophy of education by refining those 4 points in the next few pages. I will skip to the third. Thirdly, she notes in discussing the entrance of sin by disobedience. This was forfeited. That is the continuous development of people. Through sin, the divine likeness was marred and well nigh obliterated. Man's physical powers were weakened, his mental capacity was lessened, and his spiritual vision dimmed. While those 3 points are foundational to Ellen White's philosophy of education, it is her 4th point that is absolutely crucial and that fully expresses the primary purpose of Adventist education. She writes that in spite of its rebellion and fall, and I quote, "The race was not left without hope. By infinite love and mercy, the plan of salvation had been devised, and a life of probation was granted, to restore in man the image of his Maker, to bring him back to the perfection in which he was created, to promote the development of body, mind, and soul, that the divine purpose in his creation might be realized. This was to be the work of redemption. This is the object, the great object of education and life." In the 4th chapter, she picks up on pages 29 and 30 and begins to embroider that topic, and I'll just read the conclusion. In the highest sense, the work of education and the work of redemption are one. For in the education as in redemption, other foundation can no man lay other than Christ Jesus. To aid the student in comprehending these principles and in entering into that relation with Christ, which will make them a controlling power in their life, should be the teacher's first effort in his constant aim. The teacher who accepts this aim is in truth the co-worker with Christ, a laborer together with God. Although she had no formal training as a philosopher of education, she put her finger on the key element, the need of human beings. And philosophies of education see different needs, and that develops major trends in the history of education of every type. The redemptive role of education has many implications for the Adventist school. Not only must the school introduce young people, its students, to Jesus, but it must also endeavor to get them to follow him in their daily lives as they interact with others in their community. The redemptive role of Adventist education also transforms the role of the teacher from one who transmits information and skills to one who is essentially a caring minister or pastor to his or her students. Now, this is not an easy one to grasp. I remember lecturing across Norway to the non-public Lutheran school organization there. And I tried to suggest that education and redemption, they didn't get the concept that education is for salvation and that teachers are pastors. One of the greatest contributions that's unique among Ellen White is to bring forth this whole concept that why we're here is to help young people to find Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior. And if you're doing that, you're not just a teacher, you're a minister. You're a pastor to those teachers. The spiritual and redemptive aspect of Adventist educational identity will also make a major impact on the school's curriculum, especially in terms of the centrality of the Bible and its perspectives as teachers seek to integrate their various fields of expertise into the scriptural worldview or framework. We could go on and on about the implications of the redemptive or spiritual aspect for Adventist educational identity. But to put it bluntly, the implications of the spiritual must shape and reshape every part of the school program, including our practice of so-called extracurricular and the social parts of the school program. But, and that's one of the key words in this essay, but, you got the idea? For the sake of argument, let's say that a particular Adventist school did provide the highest intellectual and vocational education, that it did introduce young people to Jesus as Lord and Savior, that it did place the Bible at the center of education, that it did integrate every academic field and every school activity into the biblical worldview. Still, I would argue it has fallen short if that is all it has accomplished. After all, those are the functions of every evangelical Christian school, the goals that they are seeking to accomplish. And if we manage only to accomplish what other Christian schools are already doing, then there is no pressing justification for duplicating their activities. And yet, one more Christian school. I'll read that again. I think that was pretty good. And if we only manage to accomplish what other Christian universities are already doing, there's no justification to spend money on another one. And just call it Adventist. That conclusion brings me to the third essential Adventist educational takeaway. Oh, by the way, I think I missed a line somewhere in my introduction. Maybe I better go back. You know, sometimes you get halfway through and you realize you forgot to put your oar in the water. It gets worse if you only do it with one oar. I'm not there yet. Regarding my title, takeaways, what matters most in an Adventist education, what matters most in summary form in an Andrews education is students. Period. Lecture over. Except when I come to the second one, and what they take away from their educational experience in Berrien Springs. Yeah, so that gives me to the third takeaway. We want these people to take away a highly developed cognitive ability, the ability in the world of work, and hopefully socially, also a concept of what it means to be an evangelical Christian. And thirdly, the third essential educational takeaway relates to the denomination's unique theological package, including its apocalyptic understanding and the implications of that theological package for worldwide mission and the second advent. Here we need to remember that Seventh-day Adventism has never seen itself as merely another denomination. Rather, from its very inception, it has viewed itself as a movement of prophecy with a mission to all the world. That apocalyptic missiological understanding is based on certain passages in the heart of the biblical books of Daniel and the Revelation. Especially important in that understanding is the passage extending from Revelation 12:17 to 14:15. Revelation 14, with its command to preach its message to the entire world, early became central to Adventist self-understanding and central to the roots of its university system. Early Seventh-day Adventists began to think of themselves as the people preaching the three angels' messages. That understanding led generations of Adventist young people to give their lives not only for service in North America, but also to obscure mission fields. Beyond that, the denomination's missiological vision prompted older church members to sacrifice not only the nearness of their children, but also their financial means to fulfill the prophetic imperative at the heart of John's apocalypse. And in that imperative, we find the roots of Andrews University and Adventist higher education. I have demonstrated elsewhere that Adventism at its best and healthiest has linked its apocalyptic mission with education. It is no accident that the establishment of its first college, this institution, and the sending of its first official foreign missionary both took place the same year, 1874. They needed people that could learn languages and do business functions and other things, and they realized they needed a college. Likewise, it's no accident that the worldwide expansion of Adventist educational institutions correlated with the explosion of the international mission, spread of mission in the 1890s. Thus, the rise and health of Adventist education has been historically tied to a self-conscious understanding, realization of apocalyptic mission and the coming eschaton. It is the apocalyptic vision and the theological understanding tied to it that has made Adventism a dynamic worldwide mission. Or as I like to put it, there's only two Catholic churches in the world today: the Roman Catholic and the Adventist Catholic. Catholic meaning universal. We're the most widespread, unified Protestant church in the history of Christianity. Why? Because of institutions like this and those it spawned around the world. When that vision is lost, Adventism will become merely another toothless denomination. The losing of the denomination's unique theological understanding, including the apocalyptic vision and Adventism's place in prophetic history, is the greatest threat that Adventism and its educational system face in the 21st century. When Adventism's theological understanding, including its apocalyptic mission, has been lost sight of, it is not surprising to find increasing numbers of parents sending their children to other Christian schools or even to public institutions. Adventist higher education that has lost its theological prophetic orientation is no longer truly Adventist. And Adventist education is important only if it is truly Adventist. If it is not, It might be seen as an alternative to other systems of education, but not necessarily an important one, and certainly not one worthy of much financial sacrifice. Thus far, we have examined 3 essential takeaways. Those 3 are in one way or another connected to cognitive issues. But the most essential takeaways are related to the people in the institution who interact with students on a daily basis. That brings me to the 3 most essential takeaways. The most important thing for students to take away from Adventist higher education is that they have met teachers. You understand what a teacher is, huh? Or should I use the word professors? Makes us feel better, doesn't it? Okay, the most important thing for students to take away from Adventist higher education is they have had teachers who truly cared about them, who exhibited a service mentality before them, and teachers who were professionally competent. Although I will be framing my remarks in terms of teachers, this cluster of takeaways needs also to be exhibited by administrators, support staff, and work supervisors. Elton Trueblood, an influential Quaker philosophy, has written, "If there is any one conclusion on which there is conspicuous agreement in our current philosophy of education, it concerns the supreme importance of the good teacher." It is easy, Trueblood notes, to envisage a good college with poor buildings, but it is not possible to envisage a good college with poor teachers. And I could give a lot of evidence on that one, but that's not my purpose today. Okay? I've been a school administrator, and I know I'm dependent on you people. When that door shuts, that's where the action takes place. Okay? Administrators are facilitators and planners to help us have a place where that action can take place. Most of us can pinpoint educators who made a major difference in our lives. I am here today because of a public school administrator who didn't even know my name, but saw hope in what appeared to be a seriously flawed student. And to a Pacific Union College professor who repeatedly demonstrated his care for me when I needed it most. I'm here today because of those 2 educators. I should note that I'm presenting quality educators as the most essential takeaway because every other takeaway is dependent upon their quality and effectiveness. And I firmly believe that the future health of any Adventist higher education worth supporting depends upon its teachers and other personnel. Thus, the crucial importance of hiring. It's easy to hire, but it's mighty difficult to get rid of them. We've got to think 6 times from every direction in the hiring process. That brings me to the 4th essential takeaway. The 4th essential takeaway is a remembrance of teachers who genuinely cared about them. I'm going to read that again. This may be the most essential takeaway. The 4th essential takeaway is a remembrance of teachers who genuinely cared about them. Here we have the absolutely rock-bottom essential of Andrew's higher education. Nearly 40 years ago, I wrote an article entitled Teaching the Art of Loving God's Children. The conviction undergirding that article has grown ever stronger as I have participated in Adventist higher education and observed both effective and less than effective teachers across the decades. A quotation from Ellen White puts the centrality of the primacy of the caring teacher in perspective. I love this quotation. It's a little tricky to follow, but listen to it. If we wish to do good to souls, I think most of us are here for that reason. I want to help people. If we wished to do good to souls, our success will be in proportion to their belief and our belief in and appreciation of them. Do we really appreciate them? Do they know it? That's going to open up the channel of communication, not just at the cognitive level, but more importantly, at the interpersonal, spiritual, and all the most meaningful levels. At the very center of Christianity, and by extension, Adventist Christian higher education, is Jesus' claim in John 13:35 that all people will know that we are truly Christians if we have love one for another. Coupled with that caringness and integrally related to it is a teacher's religious sincerity. Andrews University's Roger Dudley, in his path-breaking study, found, and I quote, "No other factor was as strongly related to teenage rejection of religion as with the religious sincerity of their academy teachers." And that same holds true for those working in Adventist colleges and universities. I would suggest that the most important takeaway from Adventist higher education is the fact that students met sincere Christian professionals who genuinely cared for them as individuals. It is that kind of relational experience that will not only help them desire to follow their example, but to want their own children to have a similar experience in Adventist schools. At this point, I'm tempted to enter a host of illustrations on how the caring relationship between students and faculty in Adventist schools has not only transformed their lives for Christ, but energized them in both their studies and later professional and family life. I'm going to take the liberty of just sharing a few stories. We have an elder in our church. He's a highly specialized oncologist. He was my student. I'll never forget the first time he introduced me when I was going to speak in that church. And he told me, he came from a non-Adventist background, okay? He told me that he was an Adventist today because of my class. I didn't know that. You know, he's an Adventist today. In fact, I met a guy down at, what's that place, Baguette de France. I met a man down there yesterday. He says, I'm Adventist today because because of your influence. We have influence. For either good or bad, but it's always there. I remember opening up an exam in the same class you took, Philosophy for Education. Yeah. And out falls his cheat sheet. And I said to myself, how stupid are these Andrews students getting? I mean, out falls the stupid cheat sheet. And then I read the exam. This is a pre-med student. He needed a good GPA. I got to the essay part of the exam. And it says, I came prepared to cheat in this class. I used a standard trick. I had a clear pen, clear tube, and you take a piece of paper and you write finally on it, and you stick it inside the tube, and then you've got your pen in your hand, and you have the answers. That's what I found. He said, I came fully prepared to cheat on his examination. But as I sat there and thought about it, after what I learned in this class, I couldn't do it. And so he left the cheat sheet there on purpose and did not write the essay. That took guts. You know, I said to myself, there's a student I reached. There's a student I reached. And that's what they're there for. We're life changers. Not only for this world, but for the world to come. That's what it's all about. One last story. I almost brought the plaque for this one. It's in my office. Little gal I caught cheating. She came into my office at my request, and we talked about it. I said, look, now, you're going to be a teacher. Number one, I told her she was getting an F. And any amount of crying would not help. But I wanted her to understand why I was doing what I was doing. She's going to be a teacher. She wants to teach young people how to live honest, decent lives here and a preparation for the life to come. We talked, we prayed, we both cried. Not something I do lightly. I gave her the F. She had to retake the class, but I said, good news is I'm on leave next quarter. You can take it from somebody else. 4 years later, I hear a knock on my office door. I'd forgotten all about that situation. Here's this young lady. She's now a teacher. And she has a beautiful plaque. Wood, varnished with the wood burning. The kindly word of today may bear fruit tomorrow. And she put her name on the back. That's important to me. As teachers, students need to know that we truly do care about them. I'm going to be frank to you. I could have made a whole lot more money somewhere else. And I could have made a whole lot more money not being a teacher at all. And I had plenty of opportunities. But I've given my life for young people. And that's what this institution is all about. That's what being an Andrews University professor is all about, whether you teach aeronautics or religion or whatever. English, Scott? Yeah. But such an environment of caringness does not come about by accident. Such environments need to be engineered. I was delighted by Robert Cushman, as Pacific Union College's new president, when he asked in his first editorial in the alumni magazine, why does PUC exist? And went on to note that an important part of its mission is to transform student lives through the mentoring and teaching relationships of faithful role models. That's why we exist, to impact these young people, not just with knowledge, which is important, but with the Spirit of Jesus Christ, who is willing to give of himself. On a more concrete level, Andrews University has recently developed a new faculty honored labeled Heart at Academy, Heart at Andrews Award. Oh, I read this, I was shocked. In a recent convocation during which Dr. Tom Shepard received recognition for going the extra mile in carrying service to students, the provost noted, and I quote, "Service is at the heart of what we do at Andrews. We don't care about what you know unless that knowledge becomes a part of your practice." We have long rewarded academic and publishing achievements. The recognition of caring teachers is a needed and important addition. Sometimes, because we live in an atmosphere of higher education that rewards certain things in line with their philosophy, academics, publishing, oh man, then we forget what's most aligned to our own philosophy, the caringness of Andrews professors. So I want to congratulate the administration of Andrews, and I'm hoping that we can expand upon these kinds of bridges. That thought brings me to the fifth crucial takeaway: student remembrance of teachers as servants. The caringness of educators is closely related to the teacher as a servant of students. Servanthood is at the very core of Christianity and of necessity at the heart of Andrews' higher education. But the implications are not always easy to carry out in professional life. I still remember a graduate course, and I took in the sociology of social movements. One of the first things that the professor noted up front is that every hour he devoted to us as students was an hour lost to his career as an academic. What? And that's true. It's true. You're not promoted because you were kind. You don't get tenure because you were kind. You get tenure because you've done something academically. That's just the nature of reality. No, I'll read that thing again. The professor stood up front, I think it was the first class period, and said that every hour he devoted to us as students was one hour lost from his academic career. And he was correct. The bald fact is that the time devoted to students takes away from time to read, write, speak to professional groups, and so on. Such conflicts are genuine, and they are not easy to handle, especially when it is academic achievements that lead to promotion and tenure. Here, we have one more tension in lives that have enough already. And here we have choices to make, and those choices are related to who we are as Christians and the very purpose of the school in which we work. The first thing we need to remember is that Adventist colleges and universities do not exist to provide employment to teachers. Now, this is an assumption that some of us don't make. The first thing we need to remember is that Adventist colleges and universities do not exist to provide employment to teachers, administrators, and staff. Rather, they exist because of the needs of students. All the rest of us have been employed to meet those needs, and we ought to act accordingly. This is a basic fact. Somewhere in the back of my cranium, there's a little, inside of it, there's a little sign that reads, "I am a servant of every student and that their needs must be primary in my daily professional priorities. Now, what does that apply in daily life? I will use 3 illustrations from inside my own experience, because that's the only experience I've ever had. Number 1, we're talking about servanthood. That I, as a teacher, supply students with an ongoing invitation to make appointments to talk about their concerns, including concerns unrelated to the course of study. In fact, their heart concerns are generally more important than their academic concerns. And those appointments should be as close in time to the student's request as possible. I doubt if there's anybody here that's written more than me, or probably traveled in their tenure at Andrews more than me. It's not always easy. We live in these tensions. The tensions never leave. Point number 2, that I, as a teacher, report back to the students of exams, results of exams, at the earliest possible date. For me, that was the next class meeting, which really made it tough if I had 70 students with essay exams and they met tomorrow. I failed a few times, but that was my goal. The next class period, that was not always easy, but it gave students the feedback. It gave students the feedback they needed to guide them into the next sector of the course. Most of us have suffered under seemingly uncaring professors who delayed feedback for 1 week to a month while they spent their time on more important projects. Where is the service in that? Or better yet, whose needs were they serving? Their own or the needs of their students? These are serious questions. These are ethical questions. And I hate to say something like this. These are judgmental questions. We're here for them, not for ourselves. Kind of disgusting, isn't it? We have goals, and students get in my way. No. The students are why I'm here. The other things are side issues. Number 3, that I, as a teacher, critique and return major papers and theses and dissertation chapters as soon as possible. My goal was a 1-a-week turnaround. And I nearly always made it. Meanwhile, I have repeatedly seen professors stall for weeks, months, and even a year on doctoral dissertation chapters while students anxiously awaited. Such an approach is malpractice in the world at large and just plain sin in a Christian context. The takeaway of the Adventist student must be not only that their teachers care about them, but they truly serve them with their best interests at heart. And by the way, I'll give you a little secret now. I hate doing exams. I even hate reading papers. But I'm going to hate it just as much a month from now as I do today. So get the misery over with. It doesn't get better. They won't go away. If we're training them for service, we need to do our best to model it, even if we have to adjust some of our professional goals. In Adventist higher education, there is nothing more important than serving and caring for our students. Neglect those obligations, and the system deserves to crash. Period. Takeaway number 6. is a remembrance of teachers as professionally competent in both their academic specialty and its place in the Christian worldview. Here, I will not comment, since this is the area teachers spend their most time focusing on, but is an area that is crucial for the success of Adventist higher education. So far, I just said something that wasn't edifying. It's called stupid clock. But my last few minutes. So far in our journey, we have reflected upon 6 positive things that students should ideally take away from an Andrews education. A preparation for success in this earthly life, a preparation for the life to come, a grasp of the Adventist distinctives, and a remembrance of their teachers as caring people, service-oriented, and professionally competent. For my concluding minutes, I will make a few remarks related to a teacher takeaway: sanity, and the feeling that teaching is worth the effort. Most of us we believe that we're in what we're doing. Beyond that, we care for our students and want the best for them. Yet at times, they appear to reject our words, our persons, and our sincere and earnest efforts to minister to their needs. One professor quipped, "I love teaching. The only problem is the students." Over the years, I have many, many times come within a hair's breadth of quitting the teaching profession and doing something useful with my life. But then I come to grips with myself and realize that it is not the short-term results that count, but those of the long term. Let me illustrate. The illustration comes from my pastoral ministry, but the same dynamics are true for classroom ministry. Never forget my first evangelistic series. It was really exciting. Corsicana, Texas. Population of the church, 12. This was big stuff. 11 of them were over 70 years of age. 11 of them were female. Now, I've got nothing against females. I'm kind of old-fashioned. My wife is a female. I've got nothing against old people. I'm becoming one. But, I was 26 years old. And I wanted a vibrant congregation of young people, males and females. The good news was at a local state university, there was an Adventist student. Oh, did I zero in on him? I went to his room, and I tried to convince him to come. Well, when convincing didn't work, I muscled him a bit. Then I prayed for him a bit. And then I went back and did the whole thing all over again, and he never came to one meeting. I had failed. I had failed. But by that time, I'd come to quite a few things I'd failed in my life. In 1979, I resigned from the Adventist ministry. 69. It's a function of age. I can't remember the decades anymore. I resigned 1969. I resigned from the Adventist ministry. I was raised agnostic. Determined I no longer wanted to be an Adventist. Determined I no longer wanted to be a Christian. And for 6 years, I wandered in a far country. Never prayed, never read my Bible. I was doing my best to get away from you folks and your church. In about the middle of that 6 years, I had to drive across Texas. That's where I was living for some reason. And my wife said, "Would you stop in at Keene?" And Southwest Adventist is there. "Would you stop in at Keene and buy something for me at the grocery store?" I said, sure. So I went into the grocery store. As I opened the door, a young man was coming out. And he said, you're George Knight, aren't you? I said, yeah. And he said, do you remember me? That's the key to fake it. But I was so depressed that I just told him the truth. I didn't remember him. And he said to me, you visited me in my dormitory room in Corsicana, Texas, and that was the turning point in my life. I'm studying to be a Seventh-day Adventist minister. I didn't tell him what I was doing. But you know, as teachers, we not only want to sow the seed, we want to water the seed, we want to harvest the seed and live happily ever after. Very meaningful in my own life has been a quotation from the back pages of the book Education, talking about the resurrection morning when we meet our angel, our guardian angel, and he's going to tell us about our lives, all the things that we thought were going wrong. All the perplexities of life's experience will then be made plain, where to us have appeared only confusion and disappointment, broken purposes and thwarted plans, will be seen a grand, overruling, victorious purpose, a divine harmony. There, all who have wrought with unselfish spirit will behold the fruit of their labors. Something of this we see here, but how little of the result of the world's noblest work is in this life manifest to the door. How many toil unselfishly and unweariedly for those who pass beyond their reach and knowledge. Parents and teachers lie down in their last sleep, their life work seeming to have been wrought in vain. They know not that their faithfulness has unsealed springs of blessing that can never cease to flow. Only by faith they see the children they have trained become a benediction and an inspiration to their fellow men, and the influence repeat itself 1,000-fold. Many a worker sends out into the world messages of strength and hope and courage, words that carry blessing to the hearts in every land, but the results he knows little. So gifts are bestowed, burdens are borne, labor is done. Men sow the seed from which above their graves others reap blessed harvests. They plant trees that others may eat the fruit. They are content here to know that they have set in motion agencies for good, and the hereafter, the action and reaction of all these will be seen. It's going to be a great day on that resurrection day, and we meet Jesus, our guardian angel, and he's going to tell us, man, your life did make a difference. Because sometimes I wonder, our responsibility is not to worry about the ultimate victory, but to love God's children today and to do our job where we are. You know, that's not altogether easy. I remember when I came here, I can't remember, I was a fairly young professor. I think I was about 33. And I was trained in revolutionary philosophies. And I wanted to turn this place around, Ms. President. I was going to straighten the whole mess out because I knew how it should be done. Okay? And I was really going at it. And by the time the second term came, not much had changed. So I thought I'd quit. I was getting pretty good at quitting things by that time. But I decided not to quit. I said if I quit, nothing good will happen. I still remember getting down on my knees and praying to God that I would stay as a professor at Andrews University if he let me touch one person every year. That's the smallest number I could think of. God, if you let me touch one person every year with your love, I'll stay. And I stayed. And God has allowed me to touch at least one every year, and sometimes more. Let's just do what we're supposed to do today. That's what I had to learn. I mean, I'd like to revolutionize the world. I'd like to revolutionize the country. I'd like to revolutionize the denomination. Amen. And I'd like to revolutionize Andrews University. I'd like to even get my friend over here straightened out. But my job is just to do what God put on my plate for today. And I have found out that if I do that, God has blessed. And He will for each of us. As we work our way through another school year, as we work our way, what seems like a long career, but I'm telling you, looking back, I don't know where it went. God has kept His side of the bargain. He's let me touch at least one person every year. Only on the resurrection morning will we understand what our ministry of teaching has meant to our students and our colleagues. May God keep each of us unto that day, and may He bless you as you enter into a new school year.
Thank you, George. We'll have a 5-minute break and resume or begin our breakout sessions at 10 o'clock. George came with his wife. Thank you for allowing us to have George this morning. And please stand and be recognized. Let's recognize George's wife, please. Mrs. Knapp.